Hi friends, welcome to building a complete app with Relay and Compose. Relay is a toolkit that lets teams design UI components in Figma and use them directly in Jetpack Compose projects. My name is Justin Belcher. I'm a designer on the Relay team, and I'm here to walk you through the design you'll be coding.
Hi, I'm Travis Henspeter, an engineer on the Relay team. In this session, I'll walk you through the Building a Complete App with Relay and Compose Code Lab, and you can code along with us.
As Travis is coding, feel free to open up Android Studio and build this app with us. Or, if you want, follow along in this video and do the code lab later yourself. Don't forget to pause the video when needed to complete a step.
In this workshop, I'll be sharing my screen so you can follow along. To find this code lab, click the link in the description of this video or Google for Build a Complete App with Relay and Compose Code Lab.
Together, we're going to learn how to integrate Relay into your Compose development process by implementing a real-world app. You'll learn all about the Relay workflow, UI packages, how to import and integrate them, patterns for state and behavior, even how to map themes and components between Figma and Compose. These terms might be unfamiliar now, but by the end of this session, you'll be able to use them all to build real Compose UI fast. And design specs and visual bugs will be a thing of the past. Before we start, you'll need a few things to follow along with us. First, make sure you have the latest stable build of Android Studio. We'll be using Electric Eel in this demo. Next, you'll need a Figma account and a personal access token to use its API. Figma is a web-based tool you might have already used with designers on your team. You only need a free account to work through this code lab, and you won't need to do any design work or use the Relay for Figma plugin. Last, you'll need the Relay for Android Studio plugin installed and set up with the Figma API token. This token is created in Figma, and you just need to paste it into Relay settings in Android Studio. If you're missing any of these things, go ahead and grab them. We'll wait. All right, let's get going. In this session, we're going to build a real-world app called Reflect. It's a private daily habit tracker meant to promote mindfulness and good habits. The concept of this app is straightforward. Users define trackers for anything they want to monitor, and then they interact with those trackers each day to record their progress. But as we know, even with straightforward apps, there are lots of small design details that need to be handled. Let's look at my design in Figma. Reflect supports multiple types of trackers, and each one uses specific interactions to edit the underlying data. We have a switch tracker, which is either on or off, a range tracker, which you can adjust like a slider, and a value tracker that lets you increment or decrement a count. While parts of our design are using existing Compose components, these trackers are totally custom. So to help Travis out, I've done my best to design all the required states and behaviors. And to make this app stand out, I've created a custom theme based on Material 3 that defines different color and type styles for both light and dark themes. And to keep things tidy in Figma, I've made heavy use of its styles feature. This keeps me consistent, so I'm not handing off a ton of random colors. Now, that all sounds good, but to be honest, the way I work is often a lot less polished than that. This is an example of how my Figma file looked while I was developing the design for Reflect. If you've ever opened a Figma link, this probably looks familiar. You can see, in addition to the core screen designs, there are many notes, comments, and discarded experiments. All in all, this is pretty messy, and I typically have to spend a lot of time cleaning things up before I can send it to Travis to implement. In preparation for sharing the design, I created a new spec page with a more organized presentation and extracted components for all the custom parts of my design. This version's a lot easier to follow, but there are still so many little details to get right. Layout and spacing, colors, borders, shapes. Normally, I have to exhaustively document all of these, or ask my engineer to figure them all out from an image, which isn't fun. That's where Relay comes in. I use the Relay for Figma plugin to wrap my Figma components in UI packages. These packages bundle up all my creative decisions into a portable resource that engineers can use directly in their Compose projects. You can see I've made several packages for the various components in this project. Because Relay understands Figma data, it captured all styling, layout, variants, and component properties automatically, There was very little I needed to do to fully document my design intent for these components. So not only are these UI packages pixel perfect, they're ready to use immediately in Travis's codebase, and I didn't have to hand off a single design spec.
This code lab gives us some basic code that we can use to get started. I've already downloaded this code, but if you need it, you can either clone it from GitHub or download it as a zip file from the code lab itself. Let's go to Android Studio to see how this code is structured.
As you can see, our source code contains a main activity file, a home screen, various theme files, as well as some pre-built composables. The resources folder contains all of the values and fonts our app will use. Additional resources such as drawables imported from Figma will appear here later. There's also a data model. Let's take a closer look at that. The tracker.kt file defines the data schema for a tracker, including its name, type, and emoji. The reflect model contains daily entries for trackers, as well as some API methods for modifying them. And finally, reflect repo contains some initial data that we'll use for testing purposes, although more typically you'd get data like this from a server or some other persistent store.
Before we start writing code, I need to import the UI packages from Justin's design. Normally, this would just be a URL that Justin shared, but for purposes of this code lab, I'm going to upload a copy of this Figma file to Figma.
Open up the Figma desktop app and navigate to the home screen here. Then click Import File. Navigate to the downloaded code lab directory and select reflectdesign.fig. So this will upload a copy of that file into your Figma drafts. Once that's done, you can right-click on Reflect Design and select Copy Link to copy a URL to our clipboard. Now let's go back to Android Studio. We can import these UI packages by going to File, New, Import UI Packages, and I'm going to paste the Figma link here into the Figma source URL field. I'll hit Next to kick off the import process. So now Relay is fetching Figma data from Figma and converting it into UI packages. It's worth noting that even though I copied a link to the entire file, Relay also allows you to copy links to individual components or pages, specific versions of any of those, which can be a useful feature. So it takes just a minute to fetch down these packages. The fetch time kind of depends upon how many packages you have, how many image resources it uses, etc. So once it completes, you can see that I get a summary of all of the packages in that Figma file, and you can check and uncheck those that you want to import. And there's also a preview for each package. I'm going to hit Create to just import all of them into my Android Studio project. And now here in the Android project view on the left, you can see that there's a new directory called UI Packages. And if we open that up, we'll see we have subfolders for each of the UI packages that Justin defined in Figma. So let's take a closer look at one of these. Let's open the switch package. So as you can see, there's a JSON source file, fonts referenced by the package. We can open up the source file, and then Relay will open up the UI package preview pane with a ping that just previews what the package looks like and gives a summary of its content parameters. Now, if I ever want to update this package, I can just right-click and go down to Update UI Package. And that'll force Relay to fetch the latest version of the design from Figma. So you might be wondering now how these UI packages are used in code. Let's kick off a build so we can talk about that. So I'm going to show you my app level build.gradle file. I want to point out that we've got an import for the Relay Gradle plugin. That's going to trigger the system to generate composable code for each of these UI packages each time we build the application. So that just completed. And returning to our source, we can see we've got this new directory containing subfolders with generated Kotlin code for each of our UI packages. Let's take a look at the switch composable. So this was generated by Relay. And as you can see, we've got this top level switch composable that declares the parameters that Justin specified in Figma. We've got a composable preview here. And you'll note that all of the color layout and text styling information has been translated exactly as Justin designed it. Though note that these are hard-coded values. They don't reference the theme values that Justin specified in Figma. We're going to come back to that a little later. So one other thing to note about the generated code is that while you can modify it for things like previewing alternate states, set is checked to false, because this is generated code, it'll get regenerated each time you hit build. So don't make any changes to this that are important to you. Okay, so let's take a look at our app in the simulator. So at the top here, you can see our day navigation composable has already been integrated into the home screen, whereas our trackers are just stubbed out. They're not using the designs that Justin created. Now let's integrate this generated switch composable into our home screen. And to do that, I'm going to navigate to UI, Components, Tracker Control. Now, this file contains data and interaction logic for each of our tracker types. However, as you can see, currently the presentation of tracker data itself is just stubbed out by converting it to string and presenting it in a regular text composable. Now, since Justin designed these trackers to be type specific, let's use a Kotlin when statement to switch between different composables for different tracker types. I'll create a branch for tracker type Boolean, and this is where we want to invoke our switch composable. First, let's import it. And now let's invoke that composable here. I'm going to pass in a title parameter using our tracker data's name and emoji. And I'm going to give it a modifier to telling it to take up as little vertical space as possible. And now you can see we've got a little squiggly red line here. That's the compiler telling us that a when statement has to be exhaustive. For now, I'm just going to put in an else branch, and I'm going to put our stub implementation there. Okay. Now let's relaunch the emulator and see how this looks. So that looks pretty good. However, I'm clicking on it and I'm not seeing any interaction.
Relay's generated composables can represent multiple UI states, like whether or not a switch is checked, and provide callbacks to handle user interactions. But Relay's composables are stateless. So how do we implement a UI that presents different states in response to user interactions? For these cases, we recommend that you wrap your generated packages in a custom controller composable. Wrapping a UI package in a controller allows you to add sophisticated behaviors that store and modify local state while presenting an ergonomic API surface to the rest of the application. This pattern also lets designers make changes to the original UI package without clobbering our code. Let's implement a controller for our switch tracker.
So I've already created a switchcontrol.kt file. Right now, this just contains a stub switch control composable as well as a preview. Over here on the right is the Compose preview pane. Right now, we don't have any pixels on the screen because the switch control is just a stub. So let's change that. Let's build a switch, passing it a modifier, title, pass in the tracker name and emoji just like we did in tracker control. And let's add one more parameter here for is checked. And for now, let's just say that's true. And let's fix this. We want a real emoji there, ideally a pizza emoji. There we go. So here's the preview. Let's put it into interactive mode. That way, as we add interactions to our switch, we can preview them over here. So right now it's not interactive, but that's not surprising because we haven't implemented any interactivity. We can change the hard-coded value passed to is checked, and the Compose preview will render that. But that's not what we're looking for. We need actual interactivity. Like we discussed earlier, the desired interactivity is that when we click or press this switch, it should change its checked state. So in order to do that, we need to provide a callback that will be executed each time we click. So we can do that in Compose using the combined clickable modifier. I'm going to pass in a callback here that's unrelated to checked state. It's the on long click. I'll explain why we're doing that in just a moment. But for now, we're going to give a trailing lambda to the modifier. And in that trailing lambda, we're going to pass in, or we're going to call tracker data toggle. So what this is going to do is modify the tracker data's internal state, specifically whether or not it's checked. So that's what we want to happen when we click on this composable. Now I'm clicking on it even after adding this callback, and we're still not seeing the change in check state that we want. But that's because we're still passing in a hard-coded false value to is checked. So if we just replace that instead with a call to tracker data is toggled, what we should get is on click, the tracker data will modify its internal state. So if it's toggled true, it should toggle to false and vice versa. And then we'll consume the tracker data's updated state in passing in this parameter. So there we go. Now when we click on the switch control, we get the interaction we want, which is to toggle the check state. So that's all good. Let's now integrate this into our home screen. So we're going to return to trackercontrol.kt. And I'm going to replace this switch with a switch control. I'm going to pass in the tracker data and a modifier. And I'm going to add one more parameter here. This is the on long click callback that I mentioned just a moment ago. So let me tell you what this is about. The design calls for trackers to be modifiable by the user by long click or long press on a tracker. So what I've got down here is a drop-down menu that's shown or hidden depending upon the value of this expanded variable, which is a mutable Boolean that's remembered here as local state. So in the long click callback, I'm going to set expanded to true, which should show this drop-down menu for this tracker. So as long as we're here, why don't we fill in the other branches of this when statement with the other controller composables that I wrote earlier. So I've got a range control, and I'm just going to pass in the same parameters that I did for switch control, since they have the same API. And I'm going to do the same thing with count. And I've got the value control that I'll create there. Give it the parameters. And now, since we've exhausted all of the types of trackers in this when statement, now it's safe to remove this else branch. So let's see what this looks like in the emulator. So this is starting to look like a real app. We can click on the trackers and we see feedback in response to the interactions. We see the data toggling its state for the check. And the value also changes in response to our interactions. This is one of the range trackers. When we click this one, we can modify the value. So that's all really good. But what about the tracker settings screen that we're supposed to be able to see by long pressing? Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to long press on call mom. And I do get a drop-down menu that gives me options to edit or delete the tracker. Let's say I want to edit this tracker to be called text mom rather than call mom. I'm going to click edit, bringing up the edit tracker settings screen. And I'd expect to be able to click into this field here and edit this text. However, it turns out this is not a real text field. This just looks like a text field. What I'd really like to be able to do is just drop in a material text field here.
Figma doesn't support text fields natively, so the default code generated by Relay only looks like the design. It's not a functional control. Fortunately, Relay's component mapping feature lets developers customize generated code by replacing UI packages with existing composables. This is a great way to reuse your existing components or even custom design systems in your code.
So this screen here is a tracker settings component that Justin created in Figma and was converted to Compose code by Relay. I've wrapped it in this tracker settings control composable, which calls the generated tracker settings. Let's look at that. So if we scroll down a little ways, we'll find where this text field is being created. So it's here. Let's click through that. And as you can see, this is a generated composable from the UI package text field. But this isn't really a text field. It's just a collection of containers and text that looks like a text field. And so that is actually why in the app, our text field is non-responsive. But how do we swap out a text field in generated code? This is actually one of the big criticisms of generated code, is that it's inflexible and doesn't provide a good escape valve for use cases like this, where we just want to swap out one piece of the broader design. What I'd like to do is use this reflect text field. This is a wrapper around a material text field that I wrote earlier. And so what I want to do is just replace this call to the generated text field composable with a call instead to my reflect text field. Unfortunately, Relay gives us a way to do this using the component mapping feature. So let me show you how to use that. I'm going to go over to the Android project view, the UI packages directory, and I'm going to select the text field package, which is the one I want to replace. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go all the way down to generate mapping file. So now Android opens up this newly created mapping file. So what this mapping file does is tells Relay that for a given generated composable, I want you to replace it with something custom. So I'm going to fill in a couple of these fields. I'm going to fill in the target as custom text field, which is the reflect text field, which is the name of the custom text field I want to use. And I'm going to fill in its actual package path, which is ui.components. Okay, so now I'm going to trigger a new build. And then we're going to return to the generated tracker settings file. And as you can see, the generated text field has now been replaced with my reflect text field. And if I click through there, it brings me back to my handwritten reflect text field code. So all I had to do was specify to Relay the target composable as well as its package path, and then Relay does the rest. It passes all of the same parameters that I was passing to my generated text field. So let's see how this looks in the running app. So I'm going to long press on Calm On, bringing up the drop-down menu, click Edit. And now I'm going to click the text field. And now it's a fully interactive text field. This is a material text field. I'm going to modify the title to Text Mom and save it. So our app is now almost complete. Got all of our interactions. The design is pixel perfect. But there's something else we should check, which is, how does this design look in dark mode? Let's close out of the app and open Android settings and switch over to dark mode so we can see how it looks. And let's go back to Relay. And as you can see, we've got some issues with the dark mode presentation, especially this text at the top. Because this text color is a static value, It's very low contrast against the dark mode background color, so this isn't going to work.
Remember when we saw that Relay generates hard-coded values for color and type by default? Let's fix that. Sometimes style literals are what you want, but most real apps use Compose themes. Fortunately, Justin already created his components using styles in Figma, and we can connect those styles to a custom Compose theme so that our generated code uses that instead. I'm going to create what Relay calls a style mapping file. This tells our code translation to substitute specific Compose themes every time it encounters a corresponding Figma style.
So to help us understand why we're having this issue with low contrast text in dark mode, I'm looking at the day navigation generated composable that defines the text properties here. So this is the text in question, and you can see that we're passing in a hard-coded color, which is kind of a dark gray that explains the low contrast with the background. So Justin created this composable in Figma to reference Figma styles. So in theory, we should be able to leverage that here to automatically handle both dark and light mode. The issue is that when we imported these packages, Compose had no way of understanding the Figma styles that were referenced by the composables. So let's fix that now. What I'm going to do is open up the Code Lab folder, and I'm going to copy this Figma styles.json file. And I'm going to paste that into my project in the UI package resources folder, the subdirectory style mappings. And let's take a closer look at this file. So if you've ever worked with material tokens, some of these strings probably look familiar. What basically is happening in this file is we're enumerating all of the various styles that Justin defined in Figma and mapping them to material tokens here. And then if we scroll down further into the file, we're going to see that we're mapping material tokens to Compose material themes. And this also allows us to map multiple tokens or multiple styles to a single token for support like light and dark mode. So as I mentioned, when we originally imported the packages, Compose didn't understand how to make use of any of this information. Now that we have this file in our UI package resources, we're going to re-import all of these packages. So I'm going to go back to Figma and copy the URL again and return to Android Studio. And I'm going to re-import by going to File, New, Import UI Packages, paste the source link in. And this time, I'm going to click Translate Figma Styles to Compose Themes. And I'm going to select a custom configuration, which is the file we were just looking at. And now let's kick off the re-import process. So this time, now that Relay understands how to map a Figma style to a material token and a material token to a Compose theme, we're going to get slightly different UI packages, which will give us slightly different generated code, which we'll take a look at in just a moment here. So I'm going to click Create to re-import all of the packages. And I'm going to kick off a rebuild to regenerate our code. And then we're going to return to the day navigation generated composable. And we can see here that The color, which is particularly problematic, is no longer a hard-coded value. It's now pointing to a material theme background color. So this should be what we need to have more legible text when we're in dark mode. Let's relaunch the emulator to see how this looks. And now our text on the day navigation composable is perfectly legible in dark mode. Let's switch back to light mode and just verify that it still looks okay in that color scheme. And we're looking good in light mode as well. So I think we're going to call this done.
Thanks, Travis. We hope you have a better idea of how to integrate Relay packages into full Compose apps. To summarize, you've learned how to set up your project for Relay, import, use, and wrap UI packages from a Figma design, replace packages with custom code, and even transform styles from Figma into Compose projects. We're excited to see how you use these newfound skills on your own projects. And together, hopefully we can make design handoff problems a thing of the past. If you'd like to continue your learning journey with Relay, check out the links in the description. Enjoy the rest of Google I/O.